Hey there, curious minds! Welcome back, or welcome for the first time, to our exploration of the evolutionary story of consciousness. Here we dive deep into one of the biggest questions in existence. How did awareness become aware of itself? From the first sparks of imagination in Homo erectus, to the symbolic art of Neanderthals, to the scientific and philosophical search for the mind today, we're tracing the long, beautiful story of how the universe learned to think. If that kind of journey excites you, the kind that blends science, history, and a little bit of wonder, then you're in the right place. Make sure to like, subscribe, and tap that little bell icon so you don't miss the next chapter in this series. All right, settle in, take a breath, and let's travel together into the deep time origins of consciousness. The year is roughly 40,000 years ago. The Ice Age world is cold, vast, and untamed. Europe is a landscape of mammoth herds, roaring rivers, and endless night. Inside a dark cave in southern Germany, a small group of Homo sapiens huddle around flickering firelight. In one of their hands, a piece of mammoth ivory, slowly being carved, shaped, and imagined into something the world had never seen before. A creature that doesn't exist, half lion, half human, entirely born of imagination. This is the Lion Man of Hohenstein-Stadel, carved at least 40,000 years ago, the oldest known figurative sculpture on Earth. It's not just art. It's a revelation, a sign that humans could now create what had never existed in nature. The carver didn't just see the world, they saw within it. The Lion Man wasn't an animal or a person. It was an idea, the merging of strength and spirit, the first embodiment of myth. This was the moment consciousness leapt beyond survival, the moment imagination became divine. Every curve of ivory, every deliberate stroke of the tool whispers the same truth. This was not instinct. This was mind made manifest. Through the Lion Man, we glimpse the moment the human psyche learned to dream, to merge the real and the symbolic, the physical and the spiritual. In that cave, 40 millennia ago, something timeless was born, the imagination that would one day build temples, write poetry, and ask, "What is consciousness?" The Lion Man reminds us of what we often forget, that consciousness did not begin with us. The ability to feel, to perceive, to choose, these are not human inventions. The story of awareness is older, wider, woven through the fabric of life itself. For too long we imagined a ladder, with humans at the top and the rest of life below. But nature, it turns out, doesn't build ladders. It builds spectrums, continuous gradients of experience, intelligence, and feeling. For millions of years before we carved ivory or painted walls, awareness had already been whispering through countless forms: eyes, wings, fins, and roots. Take the bumblebee, a creature with a brain smaller than a sesame seed, yet capable of something that should not exist in a purely mechanical world: play. In a controlled experiment, researchers gave bees a choice: fly straight to food, or stop to roll tiny wooden balls. Again and again, the bees chose the balls. They weren't earning food. They weren't following instinct. They were playing, seeking joy for its own sake, a flicker of consciousness not driven by need, but by want. The same spark that makes a child roll a marble, or a poet play with words. In the waters of the world, awareness flows in quieter forms. Fish, long dismissed as simple automatons, show evidence of pain, fear, and choice. Trout withdraw from areas where they were once shocked and display signs of stress. Cortisol rising just as in mammals. Zebrafish seek out environments that calm them when given the chance, even choosing to approach the human scientist who once soothed them. Their brains are different from ours, yet the pattern, the rhythm, is familiar. It suggests that subjective experience, the feeling of something happening, might run deeper in biology than we ever imagined. And then there is the hermit crab, a creature who carries its home upon its back and must choose when to stay and when to flee. In one experiment, scientists gave hermit crabs a cruel choice: remain in a shell that delivers mild electric shocks, or abandon it and face open danger. Some stayed, enduring discomfort. Others fled, braving exposure. But what mattered was that they weighed the options. Not reflex, deliberation. They made a choice, not just between pain and safety, but between two competing fears. That, by any reasonable definition, is consciousness. These small minds, the bee, the fish, the crab, are not human, but they feel, they remember, they choose. They reveal something profound, that awareness does not belong to us. It is not a human invention. It is a property of life itself, a spectrum of experience, from the faint to the fiery. Consciousness, then, is not an on-off switch, but a continuum of becoming. From the humble play of the bee to the anxious heart of a fish, to the quiet weighing of risk in a crab, we see the same principle repeating. Life reaching inward, sensing, deciding, feeling. Every sentient being, in its own way, is a small mirror reflecting a piece of the great awareness that pervades the universe. And perhaps the true question is not which species are conscious, but rather to what degree does consciousness express itself in each form of life? The bee rolling its ball, the fish avoiding its pain, the crab choosing between two fears, they are all chapters in the same unfolding story. A story of awareness learning to move, to choose, to feel. The story of consciousness, not confined to humankind, but shimmering throughout creation. The spark that once shaped stone, carved ivory, and dreamed of gods, is the same spark that dances in a bee's tiny brain, or glimmers in a fish's eye. Consciousness is not a privilege, it is a participation. Life, everywhere, is awake. For most of human history, consciousness was an invisible mystery. We could speak of thoughts, of dreams, of memories, but no one had ever seen one. The mind was a private realm, sealed behind the eyes, unreachable by science. For philosophers, it was the ultimate enigma. For scientists, an unmeasurable ghost. That began to change in the 20th century, when humanity built the first instruments that could listen to the electrical whispers of the living brain. In the 1920s, a German physicist named Hans Berger made a bold attempt to visualize the invisible. He placed electrodes on his son's scalp, amplified the tiny electrical signals within, and watched as they danced across a strip of paper, wave-like traces that revealed, for the first time in history, the living rhythm of thought. He called his creation the electroencephalogram, the EEG. Through it, scientists could finally say, "At long last, we can see the mind." The EEG marked the first step in transforming consciousness from a philosophical puzzle into a scientific frontier. In the decades that followed, the quest to understand awareness grew bolder. During the 1940s and 1950s, neurosurgeons Wilder Penfield and Herbert Jasper operated on patients with epilepsy. With patients awake under local anesthesia, they applied gentle electrical pulses to regions of the cortex. What they found was astonishing. A single touch of current to one area could make a person see a flash of light or hear a sound that wasn't there. Stimulate another region, and entire memories would unfold in vivid detail. A childhood voice, a street corner, a melody half forgotten. For the first time, scientists were mapping the geography of experience, tracing where sight, sound, and memory emerge within the living brain. By the late 20th century, new technologies had emerged: CT scans, PET imaging, MRI. Yet the core question remained: where exactly does consciousness live? In the 1990s, Nobel laureate Francis Crick, co-discoverer of DNA, joined neuroscientist Christoph Koch in a bold pursuit. They coined a term for the mystery they sought to solve: the neural correlates of consciousness, the NCC. These were the neurons that fire whenever a person sees, imagines, or dreams of something, say a waterfall. Each flicker of activity corresponds not to the physical waterfall itself, but to the experience of seeing it, the shimmer, the sound, the emotion it evokes. Thousands of neurons, combining and recombining in patterns, create the texture of awareness we call being conscious. The modern scientific consensus holds that consciousness is not an immaterial spark, but an emergent experience arising from the intricate dance of neurons communicating within the brain. And yet, as science mapped the electrical symphony, philosophy continued to ask, what does it feel like to be? In 1974, philosopher Thomas Nagel captured the question in a single enduring phrase: an organism is conscious if and only if there is something it is like to be that organism. The bat navigating by echo, the dog dreaming, the human remembering. Each experiences the world from the inside. This subjective interiority, this what it is like quality, is the true heart of consciousness. Science can measure the brain's rhythm, but the feeling of existence remains private, first person, unshared. Thus, consciousness sits at the intersection of biology and mystery, measurable and yet forever experienced from within. From these discoveries emerged a new understanding. Consciousness is not binary. It is not simply on in humans and off in everything else. It exists on a spectrum, structured in degrees of complexity and depth. At one end lies minimal awareness, the ability to sense, learn, and respond. Animals at this level live primarily in the immediacy of the present moment. They feel warmth, hunger, fear, satisfaction. Their worlds are vivid but local, bound to the here and now. This is the consciousness of sensation, of being immersed in experience without stepping outside it. At the other end lies higher-order consciousness, the reflective, symbolic awareness most fully expressed in humans. It is the ability to imagine what is not present, to think about the past and the future, to create art, language, and myth. It allows us to see ourselves not just as living beings, but as stories unfolding in time. This is the consciousness that wonders about its own origin, that dreams, doubts, and defines meaning. Between these two poles, minimal and higher order, lies every possible shade of experience. From the bumblebee that plays, to the dolphin that recognizes itself in a mirror, to the human mind contemplating its own neurons, all are expressions of the same underlying phenomenon, awareness becoming aware of itself. In less than a century, we moved from complete ignorance to tracing the electric fingerprints of thought. And yet the more we learn, the more consciousness expands beyond definition. It is both measurable and mysterious, both signal and soul. Science can record the rhythm of the brain, but consciousness is the rhythm of being. It is the pulse that unites sensation and reflection, instinct and insight, the animal and the divine. From Berger's first trembling EEG line to the vast modern maps of the mind, one truth remains. To study consciousness is to watch the universe study itself. The story of consciousness does not begin with us. It began long before Homo sapiens walked the earth, long before language, before art, before memory had words to describe itself. To find its earliest traces, we must go back more than 1 million years, to a time when awareness first took form in the hands of our ancient kin. In the Jordan Rift Valley, at a site called Ubediyah, archaeologists unearthed something extraordinary. 150 smooth, deliberately shaped stone spheres. They were made by a species we call Homo erectus about 1.4 million years ago. To the untrained eye, they might seem simple, just stones, but look closer and the precision becomes undeniable. These spheres were not random. They were balanced, symmetrical, deliberate. No two were identical, yet all shared a single geometric ideal, a striving toward perfection of form. What possible purpose could such objects serve? They were too round to cut, too smooth to grind. Perhaps they were used for throwing, perhaps for ritual, or perhaps for something deeper, the pleasure of creation itself. Aesthetic choice. the ability to imagine a shape before it exists in the world, and to will it into being. That act alone marks the dawn of imagination, the beginning of consciousness as creative vision. Half a million years later, another sign of mind emerges, this time on the island of Java. There, among the fossil remains of Java man, scientists discovered a single freshwater shell engraved with deliberate zigzag carvings. It dates to 500,000 years ago. The markings serve no functional purpose. They were not made to sharpen or to open or to hunt. They were made to mean. Perhaps it was art. Perhaps it was ownership, the earliest signature. Whatever the intent, it required something revolutionary, symbolic thought. The ability to detach meaning from matter, to let one thing stand for another. This was no longer mind reacting to the world. It was mind interpreting it. In that small engraving lies the first flicker of abstraction, the seed of language, the birth of culture. Consciousness had begun to look inward and express what it found there. Around 470,000 years ago, at a site called Colombo Falls in Zambia, archaeologists uncovered 2 wooden logs, cut, notched, and fitted neatly together. The earliest known example of structural construction on Earth. These were not the accidental remains of nature. They were crafted, one log shaped to interlock with another. It required foresight, intention, to see how one piece might join another before the act itself, to plan something that had never existed before. This was imagination made functional, creativity made survival. The same mental leap that would one day raise temples and cities began here, beside a river, with 2 pieces of wood. Underlying irony. The notched logs at Colombo, the shell from Java, the perfect spheres of Obadiah. Each of these artifacts is a fragment of an ancient mind learning to see itself through creation. These were not the accidents of evolution. They were expressions, glimpses of a species beginning to dream. We tend to imagine consciousness as something sudden, a light that switched on in Homo sapiens. But the truth is more wondrous. It was a slow sunrise, the gradual brightening of awareness across millions of years. Each act of making, of shaping, marking, or building was also an act of becoming. Through the creation of form, our ancestors were shaping more than stone and wood. They were shaping the architecture of the self. In the geometric perfection of a sphere, in the first line carved upon a shell, in the notched meeting of 2 ancient logs, we see the first reflections of human consciousness emerging from the darkness of instinct. Imagination was no longer a survival tool. It had become an expression of identity. The universe awakening, one hand, one thought, one creation at a time. For generations, we believed we were alone, that consciousness, imagination, Meaning, ritual, belonged only to us, the self-aware ape, the storyteller, the dreamer of gods. But the earth remembers differently. Buried deep in caves and ancient soils, a parallel story has begun to emerge. The story of them, our silent cousins, the Neanderthals. The Shanidar burial, memory and mourning. In the mountains of northern Iraq lies a cave called Shanidar. There, archaeologists uncovered the remains of several Neanderthal individuals carefully placed within the earth. Around one skeleton, traces of ancient pollen grains were found, clustered where flowers once lay. A burial, some argued, a ritual of mourning and memory. The interpretation remains debated. Could the pollen have drifted naturally, or were flowers truly placed by the hands of those who grieved? Yet even the possibility reshaped how we saw them. For the first time, we had to ask, what if Neanderthals loved? What if they understood loss? Whether or not the flowers were intentional, the careful positioning of bodies, the repeated use of the same burial sites, suggests an awareness of death, and perhaps of what lies beyond it. That awareness, the confrontation with mortality, is one of consciousness's deepest mirrors. Symbols in the sea, decoration and identity. Thousands of kilometers away, in the caves of Cueva de los Aviones in Spain, lies another clue. Perforated marine shells, painted with ochre pigment and strung as ornaments, dated between 115,000 and 120,000 years ago. They predate any known symbolic artifact made by Homo sapiens. Here, Neanderthals were not merely surviving, they were adorned. They mixed pigment, drilled shells, and wore them as decoration, perhaps as markers of identity, or ritual, or beauty. These objects speak of a mind aware of appearance, of social meaning, of the invisible threads that tie self to community. For decades, these findings were dismissed or doubted. They must have copied us, said early scholars. They couldn't have invented this on their own. But evidence kept surfacing, patient, undeniable. The truth, it seems, was that we had underestimated them. The painted caves, Neanderthal art. In 2018, researchers used uranium-thorium dating to examine red pigment paintings deep inside Spanish caves, including Cueva de la Pasiega, La Garma, and Cueva de Ardales. On the walls, faint red dots, lines, and hand stencils. The age? At least 65,000 years old. 20,000 years older than the earliest known Homo sapiens art. The implications were profound. These were not accidental smears of pigment. They were deliberate marks, placed with intention in the hidden depths of caves where no light reached. Why there? Why in darkness? Perhaps to touch the unseen. Perhaps to commune with something larger than themselves. The same impulse that led our ancestors to paint lions and spirits in Europe millennia later may have already stirred in the hearts of Neanderthals. The Neanderthal brain was larger than ours, between 1,400 and 1,600 cubic centimeters. But size alone does not tell the story. Their neural architecture was subtly different. Proportionally, their visual and sensory regions were larger, suggesting a consciousness tuned to detail, texture, and immediacy. Where we may abstract and symbolize, they may have felt more richly, seeing every hue of rock, every ripple of wind. Their awareness might have been less about language and time, and more about presence, a world experienced in vivid immediacy. Not lesser, just different. In that sense, their consciousness may have been closer to the earth itself, grounded, sensual, embodied. A consciousness not of abstraction, but of deep perception. The Neanderthals remind us that consciousness has never been one shape. It is not a single light, but a constellation, each mind illuminating the world in its own way. Their tools, their art, their burials whisper across time. We too were aware. We too saw beauty. We too loved and wondered. And when they disappeared, some 50,000 years ago, they did not vanish entirely. Their DNA lives on in us, their memories, perhaps, woven into the roots of our own imagination. The Neanderthal mind was not a failed experiment. It was another verse in the grand song of consciousness, a harmony we are only now beginning to hear. When consciousness first learned to speak, the world itself changed. A single voice became many. Thought became sound. Memory became story. And for the first time, the private universe inside a single mind could be shared with another. This was not just communication, it was connection. The dawn of language, the moment thought became communal. The birth of language, thought made audible. No one knows exactly when language began. Perhaps 100,000 years ago, perhaps earlier. But its arrival transformed everything. Before words, awareness was solitary. Each mind a sealed chamber of impressions. With words, consciousness found an exit. Through sound, we could share images, intentions, feelings. The mind could echo beyond the skull, and in that echo, the first collective consciousness began to form. Anthropologists believe early human groups spoke not just to hunt or warn, but to remember, to retell the past, to teach the young, to hold experience in sound. Language gave memory wings. It turned survival into story. Memory as architecture, the brain that remembers together. The human brain did not grow larger after language. It grew more connected. Neural networks evolved not for brute calculation, but for relationship. Memory itself became a social organ. What one person saw, others could learn. The experiences of one lifetime could ripple outward, merging into a shared record far greater than any individual mind. This was the beginning of cumulative culture, the ability to build upon what came before. Every tool, every song, every story added another layer to the great architecture of shared memory we now call civilization. As language spread, minds began to synchronize, not through dominance, but through shared imagination. Myths emerged, stories that wove the invisible threads between individuals, families, tribes. The lion on the cave wall was no longer just an animal. It was a symbol, a teacher, a spirit, a story to be passed down. These collective symbols were the first virtual realities, shared hallucinations that unified tribes across time and space. Through myth, consciousness began to understand itself in narrative form. We are part of something greater, these stories said. We belong. So, as we close this chapter on the journey of consciousness, remember this. Every thought you've ever had, every dream, memory, or flash of wonder is part of a story billions of years in the making. From the first spark of awareness to the complex mind watching this video right now, consciousness has been unfolding, exploring itself through us. If this journey moved you, if it made you see yourself or the world in a new way, give this video a like. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and share it with someone who's just as endlessly curious about existence as you are. Until then, stay curious, stay present, and remember, you are the universe becoming aware of itself.